Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ed Patuto. I'm the Director of Audience Engagement here at the Broad. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the opening day of Jasper Johns' Something Resembling Truth, and a very special unprivate collection conversation today with Dr. Roberta Bernstein, Joanne Heyler, and Ed Schad. And before I invite our speakers to the stage, I want to acknowledge Mr. and Mrs. Broad, who are here with us today. Because of their philanthropy and their vision, LA is culturally a much, much richer city and a much more dynamic place to live. Thank you for all you have done for the arts in the city and for bringing the exhibition, Something Resembling Truth, to Los Angeles. To have such an extraordinary collection of Johns' artwork gathered together is really a once-in-a-lifetime experience, an extraordinary gift that you've made possible for all of us, so thank you. There is no better scholar or authority on Jasper Johns than Dr. Roberta Bernstein. Her longtime close friendship with Johns is present in every gallery downstairs and on every page of her monograph, Jasper Johns' Redo and I. Redo and I is the most important, comprehensive, and definitive exploration of Jasper Johns' creative practice and prolific artistic output. It is the first volume of her 5-volume Jasper Johns Catalog Raisonné of Painting and Sculpture, which Dr. Bernstein both authored and project directed. Dr. Bernstein has also written and lectured on other iconic contemporary artists whom you'll find in the Broad galleries, including Robert Rauschenberg, Ellsworth Kelly, and Andy Warhol. Along with Edith Devaney of the Royal Academy in London, Dr. Bernstein co-curated Something Resembling Truth. After the conversation today, Dr. Bernstein will be signing her book, which are available for sale in the back of the Oculus. Today, Dr. Bernstein will be joined by the Broad's founding director, Joanne Heyler. In addition to providing the vision and leadership to run and open this museum, and I mean that every day, for more than 20 years, Joanne has been the Broad's closest advisor in building this world-class collection of contemporary art. As a close colleague of Joanne's, I'm proud to say that most of the success of this nascent institution is due to her work. Joanne's vision created our knowledgeable and welcoming visitor services staff, whom you meet in the galleries, the groundbreaking program I have the honor of producing, and her efforts and tenacity brought this exhibition to Los Angeles. They're going to be joined by my other colleague, Ed Schad, who is an associate curator here at the Broad and the manager of publications. Joanne and he are responsible for the beautiful installation of the Johns exhibition downstairs. Some of you, I believe, have seen it already. Others of you will have the opportunity to see it after the conversation. In addition, he's collaborated with the library, that's the LA Public Library down the street, on the curation of Unfolding Language, the poetry series that the Broad will present later this spring that includes poetry inspired by the authors whom Johns reference in his works. In addition, Ed co-edited the Broad collection catalog and manages production along with the Broad's architecture catalog. Ed also curated the Carlos Cruz Diaz installation that you see here on 2nd and Grand in the Crosswalk. And his writing has been published by Art Review, the LA Review of Books, Frieze, and Modern Painters. And I'm very excited to bring him to the stage for the Unprivate Collection today. I want to thank Louis Vuitton for its sponsorship of this exhibition, Something Resembling Truth, here in Los Angeles, and East West Bank, our leading partner, for their support. And then lastly, today's conversation is being recorded and streamed. There will be an opportunity for you to ask questions of our speakers following the discussion. And please join me in welcoming now Dr. Roberta Bernstein, Joanne Heyler, and Ed Schad to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed, so much for that kind introduction. You had 3 people to introduce this time, and did it very well. Thank you. So I thought we could start with a question about your long-time experience working with the work and the person, the work of Jasper Johns and the person Jasper Johns. Your first monograph about Johns was published in 1985. Mm-hmm. Tell us about the journey from that time to coming upon the idea of doing a catalog raisonné. What brought that about?
Okay, and you could put number 1 on the slide. Okay. You see on the right, my first book on Jasper Johns, which grew out of my PhD dissertation at Columbia University, which was the first PhD Columbia had authorized on a living artist. And I had to really fight for that. When I started my graduate program in 1966, I was determined to do a dissertation on a contemporary artist, somewhat naively, not knowing what graduate school was like at that time. Actually, it's hard to even imagine because today so many graduate programs specialize in contemporary art, but then it was unheard of. And I remember one professor said to me, when I said, I'm so excited, I'm going to do a dissertation on the contemporary artist, he said, you'll change your mind when you've been here for a while. But fortunately, I had a professor who was supportive, and I actually was allowed to do a master's paper on Rauschenberg, and it was Rauschenberg and the tradition of the object in 20th century art. And then I ended up doing the dissertation, the PhD dissertation on Johns, because my professor, Theodore Reff, who some of you may know, who's an expert on Cézanne and Degas, said there are 2 artists you can do a dissertation on, but kind of begrudgingly. One is Rauschenberg, the other is Johns. And that was it, because to his mind, at that time, he could feel that these 2 figures may become of historical importance. So that's how I got started, and the dissertation was revised into a book that covered the first 20 years of Johns' art. The catalog raisonné came about 12 years ago when I was working on a second book that would bring my first up to the present, and then was invited and encouraged by Johns to begin work on the catalog raisonné. So if you can put slide 3 on. I wanted to talk about how I met Johns, because this has been a central part of my scholarship on Johns. I was determined to do a dissertation on a contemporary artist because I was very involved in going to galleries and learning about contemporary art, and understood immediately when I entered graduate school how every shred of documentary evidence on artists from earlier periods in history was cherished. And I thought, well, here we are living with these amazing artists, and if I could have the perspective of an art historian and know the artist, I could help provide that kind of documentary evidence. So I was very fortunate. I studied at Columbia with someone who owned many Johns' works, and I was able to study those firsthand. But most exciting was meeting Johns in person when I walked into the Leo Castelli Gallery one day, and he was standing at the top of the staircase there having a conversation with Roy Lichtenstein. And I had already met Roy Lichtenstein because I had been going to galleries, and he was always at Castelli. But Johns had been away, and I had never met him, and he was my favorite artist. And when I walked up the stairs, there they were, and I was so excited to meet Jasper, and I was kind of nervous, and Roy came over to me, and he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "I know, he does that to me too." But Jasper was very gracious, invited me to visit him, because he lived in an apartment near Columbia, and we became friends, and I ended up working for him part-time during my graduate studies. And I wanted to show this photograph, because here we see, this is 1969 when I was a graduate student. This is Jasper wearing white. I'm standing next to him with my long hair, this, dating me to this period. And this was quite a cast of Johns's friends. We had all gone to the Philadelphia Museum of Art to see the piece that Marcel Duchamp had just completed recently, the one he'd been working on in secret called Étant Donné. And so with us was Robert Morris here, Richard Hamilton, the then critic John Russell from the New York Times. So it was a pretty amazing cast of characters and other friends. So that firsthand knowledge of Johns and my love of his work really inspired me to start doing research and produce the PhD dissertation and then the book and my subsequent scholarship.
It's an incredible
It
story.
is. I feel so fortunate.
And that photograph is just a piece of history in and
I
of
know.
itself.
I love this photograph with the fountain in the background. It's the Duchamp reference.
And I have to ask, what did Johns think of Étant
Oh,
Donné?
well, he loved Duchamp's work.
Yeah.
And Jasper doesn't very often say what he thinks about
Yes.
things.
I've come to know
You
that as well.
probably know that. But he was very excited to see it and admired Duchamp so much that it was thrilling for him and all of us to have that opportunity.
Yeah.
So as you moved into work on the catalog raisonné, which I've had on my desk for a year, I love it. I'm going to have to pry it out of my hands. It's incredibly deep and exhaustive. What could possibly be the opening moves of a project like that? How do you begin? What are some of the broad strokes that you use to define your work on this project?
Well, it was a real learning curve for me because I had written this first book. I had written some lengthy catalog essays, but I'd never done a catalog raisonné. And it is an entity in and of itself. It's a very different kind of research. So fortunately, I worked with a woman, Heidi Kolsman-Freiberger, who had just completed work on the Barnett Newman catalog raisonné. So she was very knowledgeable about the way to approach the research and what had to be done.
Right.
So that helped get it off the ground.
Define for all of us what a catalog raisonné is, just in case.
Right. Well, it is.
Because it's an insider publication in a way.
It is. It is, in a way, an insider publication, although, a very important tool for scholars. Yes. And I really learned as I went what it was.
Yeah.
But what it is a complete documentation of an artist's work. Now, in our case, working on a living artist, Johns, of course, is still making art. But what's happening now, since there are increasingly catalog raisonnés being done on living artists, supplements are issued. Because it used to be that they were only done on artists who were deceased so that you could define the complete body of work. And what's done is that each and every work is examined and authenticated, described in detail, and then the history of the ownership of the work is documented precisely. Then every exhibition the work has been shown in is recorded. All of the publications, or a selection of publications where the work has appeared, is included. And then often there are notes. Sometimes there are essays on individual pieces. But Johns didn't want that. He wanted the catalog to be only the factual material. Mm-hmm. He didn't want anything that was subjective or speculative on the page. He did want my monograph to be part of the catalog raisonné, though. That's where all of that would go.
I was going to say,
Right.
That so has interpretation.
Right. It ended up
definitely
that if you go back to 1, this is the monograph, the first volume. There are 2 volumes, 2 and 3 are the paintings, the 355 paintings, and then the third are the 89 sculptures. And then the 5th volume is a reference volume with a complete list of exhibitions, where the literature references appear, a chronology of the artist's life, and other such materials. But each catalog raisonné is tailored to the specific artist. Mm-hmm. So they're all structured somewhat differently, but they all contain the type of information that I just outlined.
And having been the recipient on behalf of Eli Needy-Broad and of the foundation of many letters from authors of catalog raisonnés and their staffs saying, please tell us about what you own and give us what you know about the work. I imagine that's one of the first steps to putting it together, just logistically.
Right. First, locating all the works. I mean, fortunately, Johns had good records of his work, but he wasn't totally up to date about where. It's surprising, but he didn't know where a lot of his works had gone. Because things get auctioned, they get passed through private dealers. So the first step, or one of the first steps, was tracking down where the works were.
Right.
And then contacting the owners to get their information that they had on the work.
Did you ever take out one of those ads that I see every once in a while in the art publications?
Actually, we didn't.
You didn't do that.
The thing is, there are about 4 missing works. But we decided there weren't enough.
It wasn't necessary.
That we didn't want to do that.
And that probably allowed you to skip a lot of letters from people saying, I have a Jasper Johns.
Exactly.
And then finding out it was a copy of a Target painting by their great aunt or something like
exactly. No, that can happen. I mean, as it was, once the word was out that this catalog raisonné was being done, we did get contacted by many people with photographs. Is this a Jasper Johns? Can you tell me? And the good news is, since Jasper Johns is still alive, we could send those questions and requests to his studio, and he could write to the people saying, no, I'm sorry. This is not one of my works. Because that's a thorny issue.
Of course, yeah.
Because, people will think they have the real thing, and then they'll ask the scholar doing the catalog raisonné, who'll say no, and then often it can become something that ends up in the courts.
Right.
But I didn't have to deal with that, I'm happy to say.
That's a good thing. You could focus on the real issue here.
I focused on the other information.
And that only took 12 years or so?
Yes, it was a lengthy process.
Long process.
I was gonna say, when I first started working for the Broads, I'm not sure if you remember, but I took you up to their home to examine.
Oh, in New York?
Here in
Okay,
Los Angeles.
because I went to both homes.
Yes, and I remember thinking at the time, this was probably 10 years ago, watching you work at the time, I thought, I don't think I've ever looked at anything this closely on any level in my life.
No.
It was wild to see you pour over the drawings and the paintings, and I wondered if you could take us through it, whether you had a method when you had the object in front of you, a step-by-step, and maybe, should we have a slide?
Yeah,
of you
we
observing?
can show the Rhodes flag.
Let's do it.
full-
14.
Okay.
From the
No,
back.
the front.
We'll
Oh, the
start
front.
with the front.
Oh, so the 16.
16. We'll
16.
show the back in a minute. I
There
do
we
want
go.
to show
That's
the
better.
back because that's part of it. But this flag, which is one of his most beautiful paintings, and actually, I had just recently met Jasper when he was painting this.
Right.
And I actually watched him work on this painting. It was thrilling. And one of the amazing things about this painting that I remember noticing then was that even though it's a red, white, and blue flag, it's full of color. Like when you look at it, the colors pop out. And I remember at the time thinking, wow, this is amazing, how rich the surface was.
That's been one of the revelations of working with the paintings and all the works downstairs, but particularly the paintings. Even the most seemingly monochrome gray painting that
Right.
we've seen in reproduction is just, there's this vibrancy right under the surface.
Right. If you start looking, colors will pop out
Right.
and textures that you didn't think were there.
And true of this early painting as well.
Yeah, this one has a lot of that. So an example would be, to really look. Well, first there's a sheet that I had made up that I had to fill out for each one. Otherwise, it would be too difficult to remember, and you get so excited looking at them. So there are things to look for. The materials have to be very thoroughly checked. You have to measure it. And you have to look at the reverse. So now we can see, is that 14?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, in this case, what you're looking for partly is there an inscription? Now, in this case, there isn't an inscription on the reverse, but that's just as important to know as if you find something.
Is
So
this at the house?
It looks like it.
Yeah.
it was
Yeah,
at the
absolutely.
house.
All right.
And in this case, you can see, first of all, when you look at the surface, it looks like one surface, but the painting is actually made up of 3 separate stretch canvases. And when you look at the back, you can see, in this case, there's a lot of extra canvas, and how he joins the 3 together very solidly on the back. And then if you show 15, no, 15, isn't it 15?
Maybe
Yep.
it's out of order. That would be my fault.
Oh,
There
there
you
it is.
go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, one of the of course, you're able to lay it out on a table, really look closely. And in this case, what's interesting is Johns usually doesn't paint the edges of his flags. But in this case, the edges are painted as if the stripes and the blue canton go around the edge. So, that was a really interesting detail that if you just saw it hanging on a museum wall, you wouldn't necessarily notice that. So you discover so much when you have the opportunity, as I did, and I was so fortunate to spend so much time with each work. And it was a pure pleasure to savor looking at them.
You mentioned the installation, which you'll see downstairs, has a gallery completely dedicated to flags. It's been a revelation to get to know those. But you mentioned that there was a surprise on the back of the Whitneys. 3 flags.
Yes, this
Could
is.
we
let's
maybe
see,
go
let's
to that?
look at 13. Yep. Okay, here's the 3 flags, which you'll see or maybe have already seen downstairs. And this work, although it looks flatter in this frontal photograph, is actually made up of 3 stretch canvases. So the structure of this was really interesting. if you look at the sides, you'll see that the sides aren't painted here. You'll see the canvas stapled onto each stretcher. But when you look at the reverse, which is 12, okay, here you see the back of this canvas, and this has an inscription. So one of the things you do with a catalog raisonné is you record all inscriptions, whether on the front or the reverse. So one of the interesting things to me here is the title, Three Flags, and of course you have to be a fanatic to care about this. It's always been called Three Flags with the 3 spelled out. But here, notice he wrote the number 3. And so when I found this, and its title, his signature, J. Johns, and the date, 1958, when I told him this, I said, Jasper, do you want to now change the title? Because this is what you wrote on the back. And sometimes when I found a different spelling or something, he did want to change it. But in this case, he said, no, it's been spelled 3 all this time. Let's just keep it that way. But when you use the catalog raisonné under inscriptions, you will know that it's inscribed this way. Also, another thing that it revealed, when you look at the 3 canvases, of course, you see one complete canvas, the smallest one, then one somewhat smaller you only see partially, and then another one that you only see partially. And it always raises the question, did he paint an entire flag where you can't see it? Okay, because you can't, of course, know that. It turns out that the 2 areas that you don't see are painted in gray, but he did complete the flag not in red, white, and blue, but in gray. So what this view revealed was the gray encaustic that is in the hidden section of the larger of the flags.
Was there a backing board on the back? I know we're getting super geeky now. I hope you don't mind. But was there a backing board?
I'm not sure about this one, but let me show you another one that's in the show, 10.
One thing I love about that is that it's almost like a shadow, that you can't, you're not aware of as a viewer.
Right, exactly.
The one time with another artist, when I asked about, this is an artist here in LA who was making a very elaborate sculpture, and there were portions of the sculpture he was very carefully molding that would never be seen. They were hidden by other aspects of the sculpture. There was no view from which you were going to see this place. And I said, well, why are you taking such care with that? And he said, well, because I said, I don't think anyone's going to see that. And he said, well, God will see it.
Yeah. And I'm sure Jasper thought God would get him, right? If he didn't do something, if he just left it blank. Right. That was too easy. Yeah. So it was a solution, maybe not as detailed as this other artist.
Right.
But this is an example of a backing board. The painting downstairs called Flag on Orange Field, which is unbelievably beautiful, the bright orange, had this backing board on it. Now, removing backing boards can be easier or more difficult. This one was one of the more difficult ones. The owner asked that his conservator be there to do it. It probably had 50 screws connecting the backing board to the painting. And I was a nervous wreck personally, because he had to unscrew them with an electric screwdriver because there were so many of them. And I was like, oh my God, what's going to happen to the encaustic? But he did a beautiful job. And I don't know when the last time this was seen without a backing board, but in fact, notice in the upper right, you can probably all see it here, J. Johns, 58. A signature was found. And the owner was thrilled because, to find an inscription that had been hidden and no one knew about is a big deal.
Right.
So we were very excited. And again, you can see you learn something about Johns' technique because he works with this wax-based medium in many of his works. And for those, he doesn't gesso the surface, so the material seeps through the canvas. So on the backs, you can really see the image and the brush strokes coming through. So
it's very beautiful. It's more expressive on the back.
Yeah,
it's almost like a Sam Francis back there. It's pretty.
Oh, that's a good point.
It's pretty cool.
Right, it's freer, because on the front he works with these very tight brush strokes. But while we have this backing board up, another thing about doing research is the importance of labels, because the labels tell you a huge amount, because every time a work is shipped to an exhibition, a label is put on. I think I have a close-up of the label.
11?
Let's see. Yeah, this is a label from this work. Okay, Flag on Orange, Field 2. So we have a document that it was shown at the Ileana Sonnenberg Gallery in Paris early on. And then, of course, in the catalog, you can find the exact exhibition. And, or sometimes you see a label and you have to track down the exhibition, if you don't have the reference. So that's part of how the research is done. And then we always love to find these early Castelli labels, where Castelli, documented the work, and it's a real stamp of authentication to have that kind of label.
Right.
So you can see Columbus Gallery of Fine Art. That was his first retrospective in 1960. So this is a record that this work was in that show.
Right.
And that might be the only record if there's no checklist or no catalog.
Right.
So it's very important.
Backing boards become their own conservation project at a certain point because they have to be preserved because of the record they provide.
Exactly.
But if you want to replace it because you have better material to use or it gets dinged or something.
Right. I think collectors are getting wiser, though, because some have cut windows so you can see the inscription.
That's right.
And take photographs of the labels, so that every time someone wants to see the back, they don't have to take the 50 screws off the backing board.
Yes, I know all about
Yeah,
that.
I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do.
It would be wonderful to. We've been talking a lot about objects and the observation of objects in various locations. And it's kind of a metaphor for Jasper's work in general. Could you move us from the objects into the reference material? Working with Jasper to create your monograph, where you read the work and move from those material decisions into an art historical take on the work. I was wondering if you might. I know we had some images of Jasper's notebooks, maybe 22.
Let's see what.
There's the.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Yes, these are two pages from Johns' Sketchbook Notes, as he calls them. And he allowed me to look through all of his sketchbooks. And as I was doing research on the book, this was, of course, extremely interesting and extremely important. And even more wonderful was not only did he let me look at them, but he let me reproduce pages as the openers for each chapter in the monograph. So the one on the left is the opener for the chapter. Let's see, I have the names here. Because I wanted these to reinforce the content of the chapters. This one's called A Picture of an American Flag, and it focuses on the flags. And this is a double vertical flag, an idea that he's developing in his sketchbooks for a double vertical flag. So often you'll see these sketchy drawings, then with writing. Notice the writing where he says, to confuse the issue of one thing after another. What does it say? I can't read it. The I can't read it.
I like the guesses, though.
To confuse the issue of one thing over another, the self-portrait. Yeah, of course. So, I mean, who would think he's thinking about a self-portrait of Van Gogh at the Met while he's seen something in that painting related to the idea he was developing for this flag painting. And, you get such an insight into his thinking from studying these sketchbook pages.
Right.
Well, you wrote in your book, there's a extraordinary work on plastic in the exhibition. It's the latest flag in the show, where the flags have gone to the sides of the canvas, and it's revealed an eye in the middle. And you mentioned that as maybe a self-portrait move.
Right, a reference to the self, where the two flags cropped at the sides stamp out the letter I and make one think that he's focusing on his identity or the issue of identity. And certainly by 1987, when that was done, the flag was very central to his identity because that was the image most associated with him. So flags are important. And then this one was the opener for the chapter called for chapter How Space Can Be Divided. And that's the period when he was doing his cross-hatchings. And what you see on the sketchbook page is his investigation of the patterns he used for the Usuyuki paintings. And one of them hangs in the time and transient section of the exhibition.
We have a picture of it, 27.
It's a beautiful painting.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous painting. I mean, notice the grid.
You have to see it in person.
You have to see it.
This is beautiful,
absolutely
but in person,
gorgeous.
You have to see it downstairs.
Now, this looks like kind of a uniform field of cross-hatchings, but each section, when you see it in the show, look for the grid dividing it into 9 sections. Each section is divided into 9 sections. So there's 27 sections. They're repeated in this composition. So if you go back to the sketchbook page.
22?
22. Okay. Look at, say, the middle one between the colored grids. You see how each one is divided into 9 sections, and the numbers reveal the design that's in each section. I mean, you could go a little crazy, but which I practically did trying to figure them out.
I'm sure.
But the thing is about these, what's wonderful about them, and this is what I always say about Jasper. I mean, people say, oh my God, his art is so complicated. But, it really allows you to react to it in the most basic way. I mean, you don't have to try to figure out how it's all put together. You could just look at this beautiful, amazingly beautiful painting.
Right.
And then you might notice, oh, that looks like a line. Oh, there's another line. It looks like he's divided up the surface. What's that about?
You start to unpack his process a little bit. Yeah.
And, if you spend the time, that is revealed. And then you just get deeper and deeper into the work. But you don't have to do that. So.
Right. I think that's the mark of masterwork, right?
Yeah.
Is that there are these works operate on so many different levels.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've loved about putting the show together and then ultimately working with the objects themselves is seeing that and seeing how actually sort of generous the works are and rewarding because of those multiple levels of depth that you find in each work. And I've also reflected a little bit now, having met Jasper a bit, and interacted with him, how even as a persona, he has this profile in the art world that's sort of mythologically reticent and sort of very, very. But reading your monograph and getting to know the works very well, there's such depth there, and such generosity.
I was just going to say that. That's the perfect word. You put the nail on the head. I mean, it's generosity. People always think he's so reserved. And, he's not the type of person. I mean, if you say, Jasper, what does that mean? Right. Look at you. What do you mean, what does that mean? He doesn't easily, share things like that. But he is truly a generous person and a gracious person. And I agree, his art is generous.
Right.
Because it gives you so much if you're willing to take the step to get into it.
Right. And we were talking, I think, just yesterday about how there is a sense out there in the art world that, in part because of what you just said, that he doesn't talk about his work, and yet at the same time, not about specific works, but about his general approach to art. There's actually quite a bit out there that you bring forward in your book, and he's, you put all of that together, kind of like the painting. You put all of these pieces together, and you suddenly realize the magnitude of what you have in front of you. And he's actually spoken a fair amount.
Absolutely. If you read his interviews, I think they're so revealing. And if he does an interview, which he doesn't do very often,
we are aware. Yes.
He really does take it seriously. And he offers ideas that really help you understand his thinking and his approach to his art, which is, what I really wanted to do with my scholarship was, study the history of his work and the art history behind it, but also try to understand his thought process. How does he think? And help people enter the work through that route.
Was there, what was Jasper's involvement with your writing? Did you show him drafts, or how did that work?
Jasper has been amazingly helpful at every stage of the catalog raisonné. I mean, I can't tell you how many hours we spent working on the chronology, the order of the work. I mean, every detail. Because I really
should get image 4.
Yeah, image 4. Okay, here I am in his studio in Sharon, Connecticut, working with him on some questions related to the catalog raisonné. Actually, you can see on the wall the 5 postcards that are in this exhibition. This was when they were freshly completed. And he gave me so much of his time. I cannot be grateful enough. Sometimes he could remember, or he wanted to remember more, or could remember more when I asked him questions. But he always gave what he could to helping with the details of the catalog raisonné. About the book, he did read a draft of the book, and he's always been willing to read drafts of my writing, but it has to be very close to finished.
Right.
He's not going to read something and
heavily edit.
And I have to say, one of the things, both for the book and the exhibitions, both at the Royal Academy and here, he is not a micromanager. He has never once said to me, I don't like that idea, or I'm not comfortable with that, or never about that. If I have him read something, it's always correcting something factual, or more likely, catching grammatical errors, or suggesting words that make things clearer.
Right.
And every time he's absolutely right. He'll say, if you use this word instead, and I go, oh my God, the sentence is so much clearer and better. Because, so I told him if he ever loses his day job, he can become an editor.
A copy
and he'll
editor.
be really successful.
Well, artists are all editors, right?
Yeah.
In a way.
As I've gone down, maybe it would be a good way to swing into the exhibition and how the exhibition proceeds from your scholarship. But you've mentioned a couple of times in the process that Jasper is the greatest viewer of his own work. And there are so many surprises in the exhibition after we worked with him on it, these moments where you think, wow, was he thinking about this? This is it surprises you at how deep the groupings are and how they reveal them. There's a wall actually that features 5 postcards, and 5 postcards has this sort of iconic circle in it. And if you track left to right on that wall and proceed to our painting, Watchmen, there's a ball rolling down the wall, and it's magical.
Yeah.
And I was like, did he do that?
Right.
This is insane.
Yeah.
So I wondered if you could talk about moving from your scholarship to the exhibition, specifically the categories.
Yeah, I guess because I've spent so much time thinking about his work and the connections and the different themes that he developed, I was able to picture how things could work together even from different periods. And so I think all of those kinds of relationships were in my mind, or some of them, because I'm constantly, when I walk through the show downstairs, because this is new to me to see it in this configuration, I notice things like what you just said. Oh, that ball. And then he does the circles. And then this painting with 2 balls. And this is 1 ball. And, that you get a sense of all of these things that are in his mind that percolate and then pop out and then might start percolating again and then pop out again in a somewhat different form. And I think that's what the exhibition reveals.
Maybe we could have slide 24.
Yeah, this is
when Ed's talking about these relationships between works, even when they're just on site. They might be in 2 different rooms, but they're on the same sight line. So the visitor could look to the left or to the right and see one piece, and then straight ahead see another. And there's a relationship between the 2, even though they're in 2 different spaces.
Right.
This process here, where we shipped in the bottom image, we shipped a model of the show to Jasper's studio in Sharon, Connecticut, and then met with him. And then, as you can see, rather intensively, worked on precise placements. And yet, as you say, Roberta, at the end of the day, he wasn't insistent
fussy
on
or
almost anything.
Right. He might have said, well, have you tried this over here? Mm-hmm. And then you try it, and you go, that's really where it should go, And not so many of those, really very judiciously stated. I love, as you pointed out, Joanne, earlier, we love this photo because notice his hand going right into the room with the numbers, leaning right in there. And then the one there is in another part of his studio complex where he's working on the Royal Academy's model, and it was really the same type of thing. I think it's wonderful that, being the, outside of the institution person in both these venues, how both the Royal Academy and the Broad, were so, sensitive to the artist to show him the model and make sure he was pleased but coming to him with a kind of
with an idea,
an idea and a plan that was well advanced, and letting him make suggestions that I think we would all agree did help the show go to the next notch in some places.
I know you spend a lot of time visiting him and in the studio, but as a first-time visitor to his studio, looking at that image and as someone who studied 19th century art in the beginning of my academic career, just behind Jasper is this incredible wall of Cézanne drawings.
Yes.
I mean, just it was hard not to
notice
be distracted by them.
It's hard to even speak.
Right.
with those in the room with you.
I know.
It's seriously off-putting.
Yeah. He does
But in
have
the
a
best
wonderful
way. Yeah.
collection of other artists' works, including beautiful Cézanne drawings.
And an amazing collection of his own work,
Yes.
which he generously lends long-term
Yes,
to many
very
institutions.
generously.
But he also,
Well, he was a very generous lender to this exhibition.
absolutely.
I did want to bring up slide 26 because you told, to me, this connects to your research. Your research sort of makes this point in the show come alive. When you go down to the galleries, there's a late target from 1992. And the image on the left comes from the catalog raisonné. And I think that your research could help people really into the specific moment in the installation. Mm-hmm. Would you mind talking about this a little bit?
This is interesting because we do have a section in the 5th volume of destroyed works. And this was a painting, a black target that you see on your left. It's the photograph of a painting that was destroyed by fire. It was actually in the governor's mansion in New York State. Rockefeller was governor, and there was a fire that damaged the building and many of the works of art that he had. And because this is encaustic, which is wax, the fire, it actually didn't burn the painting, but all the wax melted. So in effect, it was destroyed beyond repair. So I think it was around the time right before he painted the 1992 target, someone had shown him the remnants, and that inspired him to paint another target the same size and the same color scheme. And you can see that he used the photograph as a guide. So even though you can't reconstruct brushstrokes exactly,
Right.
he really did try to imitate those brushstrokes to recreate the feel of the original painting.
That reminds me of the letter from Johns to Susan Sontag, or was it?
Oh, yeah.
About the Broad's 1967 flag painting.
Oh, okay.
That had not a dramatic story
An
like
artist,
that behind it, but
Enrique Martinez Celaya sent me a copy of this letter from Jasper to Susan Sontag about making the Broad's 67.
Oh.
And he mentions that he had forgotten, or I don't know if the word was forgotten, but that he needed to know what an American flag looked like. So he went to the post office and looked at a stamp. And this is the most famous image of all. He's been doing it for 10 years at this point. Mm-hmm. I mean, Hawaii and Alaska are now states. There's 50.
Right.
But it's a wonderful moment where the research directly informs the decision inside of these moments.
Right. And actually, that reminds me, when you are in the flag room, notice the Broad's flag and the earlier 1958 flag, the proportions are very different because the Broad flag is closer to the true proportions of a standardized American flag. The early flags aren't. Then the shape of the rectangle is different.
Yeah.
So he clearly did look to see what a flag looked like again and followed the standard flag.
One thing that I wanted to make sure that we get to as we're, kind of running out of time, but the most difficult work to view, the work in Iran, Passage 2, that became the inspiration for the title of the book. Mm-hmm. Should we talk about that?
Sure.
Number 25.
Yeah, the book, which I mentioned earlier that the catalog raisonné, the first volume, is a monograph. Well, very fortunately, the Lichtenstein Plattner Institute, which published the catalog raisonné, agreed to publish the first volume as an independent monograph. Because right from the beginning, Jasper and I both wanted a book that would be readily available to the public at a reasonable cost, because we knew the catalog raisonné would, by definition, be a more costly item. So very soon after the catalog raisonné was published, this monograph was published. So I decided to title it Jasper Johns, Redo and I. And the inspiration comes from this painting, which is one of the very few that I didn't see in person, because it's in the Tehran Museum of Contemporary Art. And not that people haven't traveled to Tehran to look at this collection, but as you all know, the politics changes, and it just didn't work out. But fortunately, we were able to make contact with a curator there and then the director, and we asked about the painting. This is kind of two different stories, but we just wanted to find out what we could about the painting and document it for the catalog raisonné. So the curator there said, well, yes, we have it, but the neon letters are no longer there. They broke, and we don't have them. Now, notice in this slide, you do see the neon letters. Okay? These did break at one point. And so when we heard this, Jasper found his original drawings for this painting, which was made in 1966. He made copies of the drawings he did for the neon letters, sent them to Tehran, and they remade the neon. So they restored the piece, which was really wonderful. I mean, they were very enthusiastic about that. And then they were able to do the examination of the piece, look at the reverse, answer other questions that we had. So that was really wonderful. But this piece, like so many, Johns loves words. And there's a section of the show called Words and Voices. And he loves to work with the names of the colors. And in passage 2, it's not just red, yellow, and blue, which you find in earlier works, but it's red, orange, yellow. Notice how it bends. Green, going backwards, blue, and then violet. So it's the whole spectrum. But the letters along the bottom, after the neon, these are hinged wooden letters. There's a work in the exhibition called Field Painting that also has hinged wooden letters. So they can be flipped up or down. And you can find words within the words. So if you read these letters, the word redo, okay, then A-N, N, and then E-Y-E. So he could actually have rearranged the letters so that bottom row reads redo and I. And in this exhibition, next to Watchman, there's a print that's based on a photograph of this painting where he's arranged the letters almost, just slightly off. But if you look at it, you'll almost clearly see redo and I. And he pointed that out to me when I first met him. And I was like, I can't believe this. You know. But this is what his art is about. He wants you to look. He wants you to look in a new way. He wants to help you get over the patterns that make you not see things clearly. And to me, that sums up the heart of what his work is about. So I decided it was a perfect title for the book.
It seems like a great place to
Yeah, maybe take some
You want to
questions.
show
Maybe.
the last slide, and we can keep that on for the.
Oh, which one?
It's 2.
2. Oh,
This will be
of course.
good for questions. Okay, there's the cover of the book. There's my favorite picture of Jasper. He had a home on Edisto Island in South Carolina. And the way he's looking at that crab, it's just, the joy of looking and seeing something that you might not have noticed before, I think is so wonderful.
And that's also about when you met him-ish.
It's about the time
Yep.
I met him.
Mhm. That's nice, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, questions?
So maybe a question or two?
Questions? Yes, sir.
Do you ever find as an expert that the deconstruction diminishes the emotional effect for you?
It never has. The question, I don't know if everyone heard, does the deconstruction of the work diminish the emotion? It never has for me. If anything, it makes it more intense because, the layers that are uncovered are so meaningful that it just enriches it for me. It never makes, I don't think his work is intellectually cool and distant. I think it's very much about uncovering layers.
Yes.
Could you speak a little bit about his relationship to the specific material choices he makes?
The material choice.
Yeah, the question was, can you speak to the specific material choices that he
Do
makes?
you want to say something out about that? Or do you-
Oh, I guess I could because I had a great moment with you a couple of days ago when we were looking at the last painting in the show. It's called Untitled 2016. And I found that across the exhibition there are these moments where it's almost like he's put down a grill or a screen and has painted over it and pulled up the grill. And when you walked me through why he does that, that it started out as the silkscreen process in Screen Piece, the sonnets, which is also in the show, and that the application of paint across a small screen, a slightly bigger screen, and then almost like a grate, and then silkscreen, that sense of scale of the mark speaks to some of his images of outer space. His use of the ruler, comparing an image of the Big Dipper to an individual star to a galaxy. The installation is full of that, and it's unbelievable to watch.
Right.
And it's unbelievable to go through the exhibition with you.
Well,
That's been my great luxury. Absolutely.
yeah. Well, I had the wonderful opportunity to look at all of these works closely in recent years, and so was able to discover a lot of these details. And he did start working with the medium of encaustic very early, and this was a medium, this wax-based medium, that hadn't been used very much with contemporary art, and he kind of made it his own. And I think a lot of it came from his desire to create these very tactile surfaces that were very material and that people could engage in terms of their textures. And when you go through the show, he's always pushing that and finding new ways to engage you on that level, like the wire screens that Ed just talked about. But you find it in his drawings, from graphite wash to graphite pencil to ink on plastic. You get these experiments with traditional media. It's paint media, it's drawing media, but push to do new things. And I think,
As working with so many of the encaustic-based works that are on loan. Of course, there are many in the Broad collection, but particularly with the early works with the targets, started to think, because you get very deep in the weeds during a period like this installing work, I started to think of the encaustic as sculpture. I started thinking of each brush stroke he put down as a sculpture in a sense.
Yeah, like a relief sculpture that
Or a
is
relief,
building up.
yes, a
Yeah.
relief. And, that it forces you to sort of freeze that brush stroke, that very first gesture. You don't get to move it around as much as you do with oil. Or
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah.
There
hopefully
was
that's-
another question. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
There's another question. Yes. Ma'am, you.
Where was he schooled, and how did he start painting flags? Why was that so important?
Should I do that?
I think we have to let you answer that.
Well, he considers himself largely self-taught because he didn't study art extensively, although he did spend 3 semesters at the University of South Carolina in Columbus and did take art courses. And he did take some other art courses. But I think he learned from looking primarily. So he wasn't a trained artist. Like, say, Ellsworth Kelly, went to the Pratt Institute, went to the Boston Museum School, drew from the nude extensively.
Right.
Johns didn't do that.
No classical training. Or
No
very
classical, or very little, rudimentary. So a lot of what he does is intuitive and comes from his interest in making things. That's what finally it comes down to. He likes to make things.
Yeah.
And he likes to work with the materials of painting and drawing and printmaking, but it's about making things. And in terms of the flag, he says, and there's no reason not to believe him, that he dreamt one night of painting a large American flag, and then the next day went out and bought the materials to
Right.
do it.
But did it on bed sheets initially.
Yes,
That
he
was the
didn't have
canvas.
canvas because he hardly had a penny in his pocket.
Right.
He had some old bed sheets around, used those as his canvas, and started painting the flag in enamels. He went out and bought house paint, but became frustrated because it didn't dry fast enough. And that's when he turned to encaustic, because it dried quickly and he could build up the surface.
Right.
And once he painted that, it's like the fountain of ideas emerged. Then he did the targets, then the numbers, later the maps,
Right.
and kind of started on a course that really changed art history at the time.
And in thinking about the question about training, formal training and schooling, I can't inevitably think about the circle that he, his friends. And
That's
about
so important.
Rauschenberg, of course,
Right.
and how, there was so much kind of cross-pollination there, and
Right.
that was sort of how I think,
I totally agree. I mean, he meets artists. He moved to New York. He's working at a bookstore that specializes in art books. Artists come in. He starts meeting people and being exposed to avant-garde art. And the most important artist he meets is Robert Rauschenberg. Not only do they begin a personal relationship that lasts for a number of years, but they mutually influence each other's artwork. And there's no question in my mind that Rauschenberg, who was the older of the two, more experienced, kind of helped Jasper have the confidence to be an artist, first of all, but to do something that was really relevant to his own time. And then, of course, there was John Cage, who became a friend and who was tremendously influential, and the choreographer Merce Cunningham, and others who were in that circle.
One more question. Yes, sir.
I noticed it was interesting that he was doing his flag paintings at the time when the flag was changing. So some of the flags were 48 stars, and then, of course, the addition was Alaska, Hawaii. Some were 50. I was curious, did he ever do a 49-star flag?
Good question. Because there is a flag
That's a catalog raisonné question.
Yeah, it is. Believe me, that is so esoteric. But for a brief time, there was a flag with 49 stars. Yeah, he never painted a flag with 49 stars.
But that brings up a good question, because we do have this wonderful little drawing on loan from MoMA of 64 stars.
Right.
I actually don't remember how the 64. How did he come to?
Well,
did he describe that drawing at all?
He says that was the first drawing he ever exhibited in a gallery in New York. He says it was a mistake. That he was doing a 48-star flag. This was 1955. And he just, maybe his mind wandered. But he did, what would that be, an extra row or 2 rows? He did too many rows. And then he said once he noticed it, he thought, oh, okay, this is kind of interesting. But he never did anything like that again on purpose.
Right.
You know, but he did.
He went to the post office to check.
Exactly.
But
But interestingly, at a certain point, when the number changed to 50, he said in one interview, I'm not interested in the flag with 50 stars.
well, you notice.
But he then does paint flags with 50 stars. He kind of gave in. But notice when you're in the first gallery with the flags, in Ventriloquist, there's a double flag in orange, green, and black. One flag is 48 stars and one is 50. And I think that's purposeful to, we think of the flag as a fixed icon, but really the flag has changed many times over its history. May again, but it isn't a set in stone forever. Right. The number of stars changed quite a bit over time.
Yep.
And I think he's interested now. He says he wasn't then in 1955, in the Cold War. He said he wasn't interested in the political dimension of the flag. But I think he's become more interested in the idea that, yes, times change, history changes. The flag means different things to different people, right, but also different things in different periods of time.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
So, with that, we're going to wrap up today's program. Thank you all.
Thank you. Yeah,
Please come back to the programs. Dr. Bernstein just mentioned Jasper's relationship with Merce Cunningham and John Cage. We have an extraordinary program called Crosshatched, actually with much of the music of John Cage and also some of the dance videos of Merce Cunningham that will be played with live accompaniment. And then also we have a poetry and literature series called Unfolding Language that the Broad has co-curated with the library's Aloud program. So please come back, visit the exhibition frequently, and also we look forward to welcoming you at these programs. And the book sale is right here if you'd like to have Dr. Bernstein sign your book. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.